And thanks, Gauri, for the introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here with so many nice people and share experiences. And you said, you mentioned we were classmates, right? What fun we had back in college. And what an interesting journey we've had. So I'll use this forum to sort of share experiences, and also level some knowledge and understand, learn from the folks here as well. So the agenda for today is going to be, I'll start with a brief introduction about me. And I understand this is largely an academic forum, and I'm an industry guy, and academia and industry sort of don't see eye to eye. So I will start with some introduction to the overall industry. I work in the drug discovery process, and then specifically the company that I work for, it's a biosimilar company, generics manufacturer. So I'll talk about that, and then I'll move to what I exactly do in the company in project management. And finally, we will recap the session to sort of tell you what I told you, and we'll open the floor for question and answers. Yep. And though this is going to be a session where I do most of the talking, I highly encourage the team to stop me if you have any question. There is no such thing as a bad question. There are always good questions. So please stop me if you have any doubts, any clarification, and I really hope you find this presentation interesting. So with that said, I love Tamil, and I hope most of you can understand this. So I'll start my presentation with Tirukkural. It says, Marundena Vendavam Yakkaikku Arundiyadu Attrathu Potri Unin. So what that translates to is, if no medicine is necessary for the person who eats, after assuring that whatever they have eaten is properly digested, right? And this is a talk about medicine, about personalized medicine. So that's why I thought this will be a good way to start this. In the high, fast-paced world that we live in, we don't have the time to think about proper nutrition and food, right? And that always has a consequence. We have, unfortunately, we become sick, we get diseases, and then we have to go to medicine. So I'm an advocate of eating good food and avoiding medicine. But having said that, we will step in where medicine is really helpful, and that's where the pharmaceutical industry comes in. So the textbook definition, very high level definition, is the industry comprises of many companies. You might have heard many of them: Pfizer, Eli Lilly, Johnson and Johnson. These are global companies. In India, we have Dr. Reddy's, Alchem, etc., and many other, Zydus, Cipla. So these are companies that develop and manufacture pharmaceutical drugs to treat diseases. And though the pharmaceutical industry incorporates everything within, there is a specialized area called biopharmaceutical industry, which is developing biologics. And these are not as simple as developing a tablet. These are complex products, and these are produced by living organisms. So to give some example, let's start with this. So I like this figure. So a small molecule drug takes comparatively less time to develop. It's produced by a chemical synthesis route. It's a very small molecule, like aspirin, for example, has 21 atoms. So this can be like compared to a small boat. While on the middle, we have the small biologics. So these are, for example, somatotrophin, which is also the first biosimilar to be approved globally, first generic product to be approved. This contains about 3,000 atoms. So you can imagine the complexity, 20 atoms compared to 3,000 atoms, which means it's going to have a different shape, different form. And with form comes function. So it's very important to know that this product is really what it's supposed to be to show that it works as intended. So the level of, excuse me, that of a small sailboat, I would say. And then on the right-hand side, we have the large biologics, for example, antibodies, which are typically injected. These are about 25,000 atoms. So from 20 atoms to 25,000 atoms, we have a highly complex product. And it has its own structure, post-translational modification, whatnot. So it's very important to pay attention to that fact while developing a biologic, developing a small molecule. And of course, they are protein, DNA based, they are injected, and examples include insulin, oxytocin, growth hormone, antibodies, etc. So now let's talk about the process of discovery and development. Some of you might have already seen this, um, but this is typically, these are the stages in developing a drug. We start with the early stage development, discovery. So this is the stage at which we have a panel of compounds and these are tested for their function. So if, let's say, we are developing a medicine for cancer and we want to inhibit a particular protein, we look to identify small compounds that will typically bind and prevent the protein from doing its job. So that's early stage discovery. We start with like hundreds of molecules and then get funnel it down to a small number. All this happens in vitro. And then we move to the preclinical stage. Preclinical means before the clinic, and this is also the stage where animal testing is done, a toxicological assessment is done. This is to make sure that the product does not cause any adverse event in an animal, right? And that forms the basis. And once we know that it is safe in animals, the next stage is to go for an IND, which is an investigational new drug application. This is in the case of US. In Europe, we typically file a CTA, clinical trial application, which is also the same in India. We file for a clinical trial application with the ICMR and get their approval. And once we get approval to proceed, the next stage is to test it in humans. And this is a big deal while we test it in humans. We typically start with the phase 1, in some cases, or even a phase 0 study, which is a very small number of people, usually healthy volunteers. And the drug is given and the safety is tested. We start with a small dose and then the dose is ramped up. And the safety profile of the drug is assessed. The next stage is phase 2, where we move to patients who actually have the disease. And the number of patients are also more here. And at this stage, we evaluate the efficacy, like is the product doing what it's supposed to do? And this is usually done by defining certain endpoints. Like, for example, if a person is suffering from diabetes and the glucose, the sugar levels are, let's say, X, and we define a pre-diabetic or, normal person as a person with a lower level. So we look for the ability of the drug to lower or any, if it's a disease, for the uh, uh, character that measures the disease to go down after administering the drug. So that's phase 2. And then phase 3 is typically large number of volunteers, typically hundreds or even thousands in the case of certain drugs. And here the safety and efficacy both are evaluated for the drug. And once everything is cleared, finally, we apply for a biologics license application for US or marketing authorization application for EU or India. India, it's a marketing authorization. And at that point, the regulatory authorities review the information that we give them. And this information that we give them consists of a lot of reports that are generated during the development cycle. Like in the case of R&D stage, typically for a biologic, there is a cell line development team that develops a cell line that produces a protein, and they create a report. The cell line is then banked, cell banking. We form a master cell bank and a working cell bank and characterize it for the presence of viruses and for it to produce a product. So all that goes into a report. And then we develop the process to purify to grow the cells that produce a protein, and then the process to purify the protein itself. Typically, it's a 3-step chromatography step. All that. So all that goes into the report, and the clinical reports together from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, all these are collected and submitted as a dossier to the regulatory authorities, who then review it, and then they come back to us with questions. We resolve their questions. At that time, we typically work very fast and as a team to provide responses. And finally, the authorities, if they're happy, they give us an approval. And once they give us an approval, we can launch the product in the market. And the story doesn't end there. In fact, the real life story begins after we start selling the drug. And this is post-marketing surveillance. So every year, We collect information from the doctors who are prescribing our medicine, from patients who report it in terms of through apps or from their visits to the doctors. So all this information is collected to make sure that the drug is actually doing its job, number one, if it's efficacious, and number two, if it's safe. Any adverse events are reported, and in the case of severe adverse events that are attributable to the drug, companies even perform a recall. They recall the product from the market and they will not sell the product anymore. And many such drugs have been recalled from the market in the past because of their adverse effects. And sometimes these adverse effects are not known during the clinical trial phase. They are only known in real life when people use it for 10 years or 20 years. Also, in the case of teratogenic effects, like some medicines have an impact on the baby, the next generation, by passing through pregnant women. So all that will be evident much later, not during a small clinical trial phase. So that is post-marketing surveillance. So this is the overall process. I won't go into the details. If somebody's interested, we can always come back to this slide, and I'll be happy to explain like process characterization and process validation, etc. But at a high level, the average success rate is shown in the panel at the bottom. And what we see here is at the preclinical stage, 2 out of 3 molecules make the cut, 1 out of 3 are rejected. Phase one, it's half and half. Half of the trials are successful in phase one, half fail. They either fail because they produce adverse effect on in human beings, which are not captured in animal studies, because animals have different metabolism. Like in the case of antibody, they have different FC receptors, etc. So some medicines do not show their true character in animal studies. They only become evident when tested in humans. And phase two clinical study, which is with patients. Phase one is with healthy volunteers for safety. Phase two is with patients to show that the drug is doing its job. And here it's 34%, which means only 1 out of every 3 product does its job properly. And then phase three is 70%. So usually when phase two, phase one, and phase two are successful, phase three has a higher success rate. But even here, 1 out of every 3 product fails the test. And lastly, regulatory review, it's 91%, which means 1 out of every 10 product is killed at that stage, probably because the regulators are not happy with the data provided or insufficient information, or they're not really convinced that the product does what it's supposed to do effectively. So all that together multiplied, overall success rate is 11.7 or 12%. 1 out of every 8 products make the cut, become a drug. Vast majority, after going through all these stages, still fail. And this process typically takes about 8 to 10 years. So you can imagine the sort of failure it will be for a company that's developing it. Okay. Which brings us to the challenge. As I mentioned here, it's a high failure rate, very long development cycle, and high cost. Just some statistics here. It takes average of 10 years for a medicine to go through the process and become a drug. And with a success rate of 12%, an average cost to develop a new medicine is $2.6 billion. And most of this cost goes towards the clinical studies, which cost like hundreds of millions of dollars. Lead to, just quickly checking the time here to make sure that everything is fine. The impact is, because of this, the product needs to be priced pretty high. And this results in people not being able to afford the medicine. In the case of the Western world, countries like US and Europe, this is not much of a problem because they have a very well social security system. So if somebody gets sick, the social security system covers for it. But in developing countries, especially India, where the insurance coverage is very low, and most people don't have functional unfortunately, I'm pained to say that most families are just one critical illness away from complete poverty, and that's a fact. So, but that's the reality, and this is where generics pave the way for making things better. So let me tell a Kuti story, a small story. This is regarding the development of antiretroviral drugs in Africa. As you know, in the 1990s, Africa was going through a major epidemic of AIDS epidemic. And in this case, the antiretroviral drugs, many drugs, were available. Pharmaceutical companies had already developed them for other purposes, but they could be used effectively to treat AIDS. But the problem is the cost. In the 1990s, yearly treatment for AIDS using the antiretroviral therapy cost about $10,000. And $10,000 is a lot of money for folks in Africa. As a result, about 10 million people were infected. Many couldn't afford the treatment and died. Today, this is very much treatable, and it is being treated using retroviral drugs, but not in the 90s. And that is where Indian company, Cipla, these guys were very aggressive. The founder at that time really wanted to push for developing the medicine for this. And they were able to produce the drug. And in 2001, they started selling it in Africa as a generic for $1 a day. That's $365 in a year. So $10,000 compared to $1 a day. Sorry, $365 a year. That was a game changer. And as a consequence, even today, 90% of the global antiretroviral drugs come from India. So this is how the generics evolved and how India became a key player in the generics industry. And this was because though the intellectual property rights and trademark patent rights were protecting the drugs in the West, it was not the case in India, because India did not recognize those patent protection. So the generics industry boomed in India. There are a lot of companies, Alchem, Orchid, and Zydus. So these guys came up and they started developing medicines for the world. And then in the pharma companies pushed back, and this time they came with the TRIPS agreement, trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, TRIPS agreement. And developing countries like India were forced to sign the deal in 2001 as part of our globalization. And this created trade barriers. So briefly, there was a setback for the generics industry. But then later, even the Western world realized that generics are a necessity to provide medicines to people, to make healthcare democratic. So they came up with a more established regulatory pathways for generics. So instead of playing around with countries that don't recognize patent, let's create a regulatory pathway. And this also paved way for Indian companies to develop products and sell them in developed countries like US or Europe. In fact, Dr. Reddy's, Cipla, they're all selling products in the Western countries. So they established a more regularized pathway for generics. And one of this is the Public Health Service Act, also called Obamacare, that came in 2009 during the time of President Obama. And around the same time, Europe enacted certain regulations that made it easy for a level playing field for everyone to develop generics. So with that said, let's another small story. So let's meet Jay. So she's the heroine of her story, and all of us, most of us, know somebody or somebody who knows somebody who is affected by a disease. So she's suffering from breast cancer, and she's undergoing treatment. But unfortunately, the cost of treatment is pretty high until the biosimilars enter the market. And now she has a chance, and she is leading a good life. She's a survivor. Yeah. And statistically, annually, 95,000 women die of breast cancer every year. And this is a disease that can be cured if diagnosed and treated on time. And often the problem here is the cost of the drug that is prohibitively high. And where a biosimilar is available, this gives a chance for people like Jay to make it. And here I'll share a bit of statistics. So this is a particular drug called trastuzumab. You might know it, the originator or Roche's product. The original product is Herceptin, was called Herceptin. And this was launched by Roche in 2002. Um, and it cost 1,20,000 rupees in India. The patent for trastuzumab expired in 2012. And when it expired in 2012, uh, biosimilar manufacturers in India were able to launch the biosimilar versions. And these were marketed as Hersion, Biceltis, etc. One of the players was Biocon that came up with their own version, and this was priced at 75,000. So not a whole lot of a difference, but still a major difference for somebody who were just at the cusp of being able to afford. And then Roche, there was some back and forth court cases between Biocon and Roche in India, where Roche was trying to um, uh, restrict the other players from entering. And then the Competition Commission of India finally ruled against in favor of biosimilar manufacturers. So right now, the cost of trastuzumab has gone down even further. So um, these are some of the brands that are available right now. From Biocon has Canmab, Mylan has Hertraz, Cadila has Vividra, Reliance has Trasturel, etc. Some example of the same product as a biosimilar. And this morning, I was looking at the marketplace to get a sort of feel for how much these cost. And some of these medicines, as you can see, the prices have gone down to almost one-tenth of the original introductory price of Roche. And this was, remember, 1,20,000 back in 2002. So adjusting for inflation, it would be much more right now. So biosimilars have actually leveled the field and made a lot of these, has made trastuzumab affordable for a lot of people. So now let's shift gears and talk about, we spoke about biopharmaceutical and sort of introduced to biosimilars. So what is a biosimilar, right? So these are generic or copycat version of branded drugs. These are, you can never say this is identical to the original product, like a small molecule, like paracetamol, for example. All paracetamol from all manufacturers have the same shape and structure because it's a small molecule. But for complex products like biologics, example antibodies, you can never have a product that is exactly identical. Even for the same manufacturer who uses cell culture to make the product, not every cell behaves similarly. So each cell produces its own version of the product. So even for the same manufacturer, the product will have heterogeneity. So when another manufacturer is developing, their process will not be similar. For example, they might use a slightly different cell line, they might use slightly different media, culture conditions, purification conditions, and all that plays into the final product that we end up. Even for the same manufacturer, there will always be batch to batch differences. So in this case, one can never claim a product to be identical. It is similar, and hence the idea of biosimilar. These are typically commercialized after patent expires for the original product. So sort of the way we work is we start development of the product way in advance. So we know that for a particular drug, the patent is going to expire 5 years from now. So we start development right now. In the case of some products, it might not be worthwhile because the time to expiry and market entry would be very short. So there will be a lot of other manufacturers who come in at that time. But so we choose products that have reasonable patent cliff or the date when the patent is expiring so we can develop the product. This usually triggers price competition with the originator. As we saw in the case of trastuzumab, Roche dropped the price of the product. They introduced it at 1,20,000 in 2002, and right now the price is, they are pricing the product at 60, 70,000, which means that they are forced to reduce the price because of the entry of biosimilar manufacturers, and which is good for consumers, right? When two manufacturers compete with each other and drop the price, we get a good discount, and it's the same idea. And lastly, and most importantly, this improves affordability for people and gives broader access to these medicines. And for companies like Alvotech, which develop these biosimilars, what are the success factors, right? We are competing with other biosimilar manufacturers, a lot of companies in all over the world, and they're all developing biosimilars similar to us, similar to the original product. So we need to be fast, to market. We need to beat them. It's like a race. We need to beat them and develop the product really quick, which means all our scientists need to work really fast to get the product working in manufacturing to manufacturing and clinical. Number two, it doesn't matter if we get it fast if the cost of developing the product is very high, right? We will lose the game if we price it higher than the originator or higher than our competitors. So it has to be fast, it has to be cheap, and it has to be good. That's where quality comes in. We cannot sacrifice quality. It's a product that goes into people. So the quality cannot be compromised. And if the quality is compromised, the regulatory authorities will kick us down the curb. So we will have to meet the quality and regulatory requirements. So this is like a holy grail, the triple constraint. So we need to be fast, quick, and with quality. So with that said, the concept of biosimilar is pretty interesting. On the one side, we have originals, companies that are developing the original product, like in the case of trastuzumab. So here they start with the product, they characterize the product, and then they do non-clinical or animal studies. They do PK/PD studies in safe, and then they finally do clinical studies. So it's sort of like we call it as a pyramid format. But in the case of biosimilars, as we can see, clinical is only at the top. The pillar here is analytical, which is to have a complete panel of analytical testing. And here we have a panel to test, for example, size exclusion, HPLC, peptide mapping, all these techniques to show that our product is similar to the originator product using a panel of testing. This can be physicochemical, this can be functional, like bioassays, etc. So this really forms the basis. Analytical testing forms the basis because we need to show A is equal to B. And then we do clinical studies, non-clinical animal studies, if required, to show that A is equal to B again. And then we do it in PK/PD. The good thing about biosimilars is there is no risk that is carried, as in the case of originator. The originator does not know that the product will work for the disease. But as biosimilar manufacturers, we don't have that risk because we know that the product works. It worked for the originator, they're selling it. So all it requires from our side is to make sure that our product is very similar to the originator. And here the principle is if the reference product is safe and effective, and if our biosimilar is equivalent to the reference product, then QED, the biosimilar has to be safe and effective, and hence approvable by the regulators. So this is the founding principle for biosimilars, as in there should be no clinically meaningful difference between the biosimilar and the originator. Clinically meaningful difference in terms of safety, potency, and efficacy. These are three holy words that we use in biosimilar industry. So, and also the development timeline is considerably shorter. As we can see, it's about 12 years, 10 to 12 years for originator product with all the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies. But for biosimilars, we don't have phase 2 because we do it in phase 1 to show that it is safe. And then we move to phase 3 to show that it does its job. And bingo, we are done. There's also no discovery phase. We proceed directly with development because we already have the product. We're not screening a bunch of products to select one that works. We already know that works. So we just develop the process, not the product itself. Okay, so that's the overall concept of biosimilars. So this slide here captures a typical biosimilar development process. This is a standard process used by most companies. The terminologies might differ slightly based on the company that one is working for, but at a high level, it starts with a program selection that's shown in gray here. Let me use a laser. Program selection phase. So this is where we have a bunch of products that's being sold in the market. We take it and then we study it and then we see which ones we can develop. And is based on can we really develop the product with our capability? When does the patent expire? How much does it cost to make it? Is there any complexity, etc. So all that, like for example, IgG1 versus IgG4 antibody, or batch versus fed batch. So those are factors that go into program selection. And once that we select it, this is called molecular assessment phase. The end of this phase is we produce a detailed specification of the originator product. So we take the originator product, we use a bunch of analytical testing and build a profile, like what should be the large molecule species percentage, small molecule species, functionality, what should be the affinity, etc. So all that goes into a file that we develop, and then we start developing the process. So first a cell line that will produce the protein of interest, and then once the cell line is developed, we select the clone that produces the best yield, titer, viability, etc. And then that's the clone selection milestone. And then we start developing a process. And once the process is fully developed, we scale it up to a pilot scale. So process development is usually a 5 liter or 10 liter bioreactor. And then we move to a 50 liter, 100 liter, 250 liter pilot scale. So this is gradual process of scaling up the process all the way to manufacturing. And finally, GMP. So all this at this stage is still GLP, good laboratory practice. And then comes GMP, good manufacturing practice. This is where we also involve our quality teams who provide quality oversight. Everything is documented, and the drug substance, which is active pharmaceutical ingredient, is manufactured. And then the drug product, which is the final fill and finish. So we have the active substance that's usually put in a bag, and then these go to drug product filling, where they are filled into syringes or vials, etc. Um, and also at this stage, we have preclinical animal studies that's happening. And then the next phase is, we call it pre-first in human. This is when we are ready to put it in humans, test it in humans. So this is a PKPD or phase 1 study, a confirmatory patient study. This is phase 3. And we also characterize our process, so and validate our process. This validation is necessary because it's a product that's going to be injected into humans. We need the process to be very reproducible, very robust. So we perform a bunch of tests, reproducibility, sensitivity, etc., and thoroughly characterize the process to make sure that it performs as intended. And then we validate it with n equal to 3 batches so that it performs similarly each time with the 3 batches. And then we, at that stage, the analytical testing is done, the clinical studies are done, and then based on the results, we decide whether we are ready to file with the regulatory authorities. And then we file, and then we wait for approval. And if all goes well, we'll get our approval and we'll be able to sell the drug. So this is overall high-level development process. And to give an example, what do typical drug discovery projects look like, right? One might think it's like start to finish in one piece, and then we have these various activities, as I showed here. That's not the case. That's never the case. In fact, it's like this. We start, and then somewhere along the way, we abort it because there's no business case. Our competitor has already entered the market, and they are able to produce it at a cheaper cost. So we will have to abort. Or we go through these ups and downs. We start with the product, and then for some reason, like COVID came, and we were not able to procure material from our vendors. So a lot of things were delayed because of that. And then clinical studies. We start the clinical study, but we are not able to attract patients. So that can come as a surprise. Manufacturing surprises, not being on time, a lot of problems. You name it, and we have had that problem. And this is how a typical process looks, full of ups and downs, like a roller coaster ride. And since drug discovery projects are inherently complex, we require tight command and control over this development. And this is where project management comes in. So we guys, I mean, we're not like Superman or anything to come in and save the day, but we would like to think so. But why is project management needed? So let's start with the why question, right? At the end of the day, companies exist to serve patients and also make money in the process. So the project needs to be delivered successfully, and we need to ensure that the company targets with the project are met. Number two, we have different line functions like research and development, quality, regulatory, in industry. So these are different line functions. And we need to have an unbiased, independent, timely input to management. So we are sort of like the guard dogs or third-party auditors. We monitor what's happening with the program and also make sure that that information goes to the management. Without project management as an independent entity, the management would be befuddled, like confused with information coming in from different departments, and they have absolutely no idea, no way to make sense of this. Uh, as I mentioned, monitor the viability of a business case. There should be a business case to develop a product. It should be fast, it should be cheap, and it should be of quality. If we cannot meet it, we need to kill the project. So someone needs to track the business case to provide a structured framework for product development. Otherwise, people will be working in silos and working on different things. So it needs to be structured to make sure that A to B, B to Z, B to C, C to D is followed. And if the management wants to know what's happening, we are the single source of truth for all update related to the project. And most importantly, we align expectation from stakeholders. Like, what does the management need? What do our teams need? What do our SMEs need? Sometimes they need money to get a new equipment, and it's our duty to take that back to the management and make sure that the scientist gets that equipment to do their work. An example of such an equipment that we bought is controlled freeze thaw equipment for a drug substance. And uncontrolled freeze thaw for some products, it has a adverse impact on the product quality. So we need to make sure that the frozen drug substance or pharmaceutical ingredient is thawed to room temperature, 2 to 8 degrees in a controlled manner. So we bought an equipment for that. It was $500,000, but it was required. So that's one example of aligning stakeholder expectation. Another case is we work with partners who commercialize our product in different countries. We have partners in India as well who commercialize our product in India. So we need to make sure that they're happy with the overall development process. And then identify and solve problems. We work with people, right? There are always issues between people, and something is not working. So we step in and need to solve the problems early before they snowball into something big. And this directly has an impact on the right-hand side shown here: timelines, budget. COGS is nothing but cost of goods sold. So when we develop a product, it has to have a specific value, and this is usually below the price at which we sell it. This is the cost, what it costs for us to manufacture it. And then we also monitor the intellectual property situation. Like, if the originator is coming at us with another patent that will potentially block us. And there were cases like, for example, we develop a product and all our competitors develop a product. And then suddenly when we go for approval, we have the approval, but we are forced to not sell. We cannot sell the product because there is a formulation patent by the originator that was somehow missed. And this has happened to products being blocked. The product is approved by regulators, by FDP, because there's a patent that is blocking it. So we need to monitor that situation as well, and competition, like what are our competitors up to, sales demand, manufacturing footprint, risks. So this is what we do. We sort of like an independent guard dogs who make sure that everything is going according to plan, while also we look outside to see where the world is going to make sure that our product is successful. So sort of this is how I see as project managers. Like, see the guy in the middle, he's called as a conductor, right? There are musicians all around him, and each musician is gifted, talented. The person is a good violinist, a good guitar player, a good drums player, but all that talent would not be best utilized, or sometimes even useless, if if the conductor is not there to make sure that each person does thing when they're supposed to do it. So it's kind of coordinating all the different players. That's what a conductor does. And that's exactly what a project manager does in a drug discovery and development company, to make sure that everybody is aligned and everybody do what they're supposed to do when they do it. And the slide shows typical stakeholders that we liaise with on a daily basis. research and development. These are the scientific guys like you guys. Probably if you go to industry, some of you will become research and development people, either working in cell line development or upstream process development, downstream process development, formulation development. So that's the research and development guys. We have the manufacturing guys, uh, supply chain, who is responsible for procurement, global regulatory affairs, who work with the regulatory authorities and provide feedback to the team on a timely manner on whether we should be doing things the way we do it. We call it regulatory strategy, and that's provided by the GRA team. We have the clinical and medical affairs team that take care of developing a clinical protocol, which we submit to the regulatory authorities for approval. Once it's approved, we then start the clinical, we submit the clinical trial application, and then we start the clinical study. So all that is overseen by the clinical team. We have the commercial operations team that work with our customers, which are other pharmaceutical companies that will sell our product in different countries. We have quality control, quality assurance, finance, HR, our investors who we are a public listed company. So we have investors. So we provide quarterly reports for them. That's made by project management team. We have our own management who come back to us with really harsh questions. If something is not going according to plan, we are the ones who are held responsible. So we need to answer to them. We have our customers, vendors who provide items to us, information technology, and our contract manufacturing organization. We don't have full capability to manufacture some things, so we work with contract manufacturing organizations globally, and they are, in a sense, our stakeholders. So we work closely with them to make sure that they're happy and they make us happy. So these are the stakeholders managed. And from the why, we get to how do we do this? So for that, we develop a business plan. Like all things, we develop a plan. So there's like a high-level Gantt that shows the different activities that need to happen and the different functions who are responsible for these activities. So it's like high-level Gantt, and we track progress according to this Gantt to make sure that we are according to going as per plan. Budget, this is a spreadsheet that has all the cost for development, manufacturing, clinical, and make sure that we don't go over budget. And if we do, we escalate it to our management to get additional funds to raise the budget. And scope is basically what we are developing, what we're going to do, and make sure that that's highly controlled. And business case, as I mentioned, like should we even do it? That's the business case. And then we develop a roadmap for that with stages and milestones. In a previous slide, I showed the different stages and milestones in development, and that's this. And this is the third one is the people part. We assign, identify team members, we assign the team, we kick off the project, and then align expectations, like make sure that people really know what they're supposed to do in this program. And we also have regular team meetings. If required, we start with once every month and then once every 2 weeks. If required, even every day to sort of have quick touch points to make sure that everything is going according to plan. Capture key actions there and follow up to completion. Sometimes it's as simple as reaching out to, hey, Ram, have you finished what you're supposed to do? When can I expect it? Right? That sort of question. And um, yeah, most people in the company don't like us. Of course, that depends on the way we work and how we set up the relationship. So mostly it's been pleasant. That was just a joke. Establishing and communicating updates to all our stakeholders so they know what we are doing. And anything that requires escalation needs to go to management ICE. So we try to solve it internally without taking things to management. But if something needs to be, we take a call and we take it to management through appropriate governance forum. Governance forum is when we have the management heads coming in and guiding the team on how to solve any problem. And lastly, I mentioned we are a startup company. So startup company, there's an interesting joke. There were two guys, one guy who's been with the company for a long time and a guy who just joined the company. And the guy who just joined the company, he was very eager, right? Young chap, eager to prove himself to the company and to the boss. So he saw there was a hole in the ground. So he says, there is a hole in the ground. And then the person next to him says, oh, yeah, there is a hole in the ground. And then the guy says, what are we going to do about it? The other guy says, you fix it. And then he says, why should I fix it? And and the boss says, well, you noticed it, so you fix it. That's usually the case with startup companies. People don't have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. It's like, should I be doing it? Should the guy the next desk be doing it? So that's where we step in and we define the roles and responsibility, like who should be doing it, and make sure that the person who is asked to do it does it on time. And overall, sort of maintain chaos, order in the chaos and keep the team motivated. That's what we do in practice. And what makes a successful project manager? These are some of the snippets. I got it from my boss, and I really love these. Own the asset. A project manager, like I work on a particular, like a trastuzumab, right? I should own it. I should know what we are doing internally within the company to develop the product, what my clinical team is doing, what my regulatory team is doing, what my R&D friends are doing. And I also need to know what the competitors are doing. Need to read newspaper articles, follow the forums, publications to understand what's happening with the asset. So in a sense, really own the product. Number two, stay on top, but stay at the top. This is really important that we stay on top of things, know what's happening everywhere, but resist the temptation to go in and do what SMEs are supposed to do. Because at the end of the day, we have the scientists who are really good at what they do. And we shouldn't butt in and do the things for them. It's about inspiring. It's about getting them to do the work within the timelines. So stay on top of things, but stay at the top. Don't get into somebody else's shoes, but at the same time, inspire them and get the activity completed. But at the same time, zoom in, zoom out. Zoom out, make sure that everything is going fine, but there could be a problem. Like downstream processing is facing some problems with the filter getting choked, right? Zoom in, work with the team, have a set of these meetings, get SMEs, if required, get people from other projects, HODs, external stakeholders, and solve the problem. Once the problem is solved, or make sure that the team solves the problem, right? Zoom out. Fourth point, the right hand should know what the left hand does. This is usually where the problem is. We have really talented people, but who don't really work as a team, work with each other. And the role of a successful project manager is to make sure that they both know what they're doing. So communication is really, really important. Number five, uh, anticipate problems, like what could go wrong in this, and have plans for worst case. So we call this a risk management plan. So we sit together and then we identify potential risks in a program. So this could be like, for example, the regulatory authorities will not accept our clinical proposal. So what are we going to do about it? It could be that a competitor or the originator has run a clinical study with 1,000 people, and we think we can do it with 200 people and still demonstrate that our product works fine. We tease the regulator with that, and sometimes the regulator might not accept it. So we should have a plan in place should the regulator not accept it, right? So that's anticipating problems and preparing for that. We call it scenario planning and scenario mapping. Identify opportunities. These could be opportunities to simplify something, reduce the cost. Instead of using two filters, we use one filter, and that of a better capacity or a different vendor, and that is cheaper, right? So this is identifying opportunities on a continual basis, and all that translates to reducing the cost of medicine. And we do remember that somewhere in the world, someone would benefit from this if they are able to get the medicine at a lower price. And lastly, celebrate, right? Something goes right, we should all party, party nice and party hard. Sort of keeps the team morale high. So these are typical characteristics of a good project manager. This brings me to the end recap. So what did we learn today? We went through gave an introduction to pharma, biopharma, and biosimilar industry, the challenges surrounding it, and what the challenge does, right? The impact is the high cost of medicines. That's where generics come in. And then we went through the development process for biosimilars. And then to manage a complex process like that, we need a specialized function like project management. And lastly, we went through what makes a good project manager. And hopefully at this point, I hope I would have inspired some of you to consider project management as a profession. or an industry as a profession. Not to play the salesman here, but hope you found the talk interesting. So I'll pause here and take questions.